On the mountain, in the valley, in the crowded streets, or the empty desert, in our hope and in our waiting, we are never alone. God is with us.
All right, good morning, Forward Point. How many of you guys have survived just coming off one of the snowiest Novembers ever in history here in Syracuse? Everybody doing okay mentally in your minds, handling the fact that this has been a little bit of a harder, earlier snowfall than normal, right? What are some of the ways that you can kind of deal and cope with it? You gotta find some kind of winter activity. Do we have anybody out there who likes skiing? We got any skiers out there? Yeah, a couple people I've never been personally, but looks kind of dangerous, so I'll stay away from it. How about, what is the thing you put on your feet? And there's snowshoes, right? There's snowshoes, and then there's cross-country skiing. Very different. I would imagine if you like one of those, then you would be mad at me for grouping them together. But anybody snowshoe or cross-country ski here? Couple people. How about the most basic, traditional kind of winter activity? Any sledders out there? Anybody ever been sledding? How many people have been sledding yet this year? Anybody been sledding yet? Yeah, we've had plenty of opportunity. When I think about sledding in Syracuse, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the big hill in, what was it, Western Lights Plaza on the reservoir there? Westvale Plaza, I'm sorry. Thank you, Linda. Yeah, I don't even think you're allowed to sled there anymore. But back in my day, when I was a little youngster whippersnapper, we were able to sled down there. And I remember the different kind of casualties that happened as a result of that hill. One, my cousin who was living with us at the time actually broke her collarbone sledding down that hill. And I remember being there one time with just some friends, and if that hill was not big enough and steep enough on its own, all the young crazy boys decided, let's do a little snow ramp on this hill, right? So they kind of packed together a snow ramp so you could get on one of those inner tubes that have like zero friction, and you're going down like faster than Superman. And you know, some people kind of fell off to the side, and it was my turn, so I was going to do it. And I remember this thing was going super fast. I'm like, oh my gosh, I better miss this jump because this is going to kill me. And I must have hit the jump like right on, because I felt like I was flying in the air for what like seemed like an eternity. It's the coolest feeling in the world until you come back down and you hit the ground, right? And this is snow that's been sledded on multiple times, so it's hard. It's not like fluffy. It's almost like you could ice skate on it. It's so hard. And I remember just landing like on my stomach, and for the first time having that feeling that you feel like when you get punched in the gut and you lose, like you can't breathe. You're like trying to catch your breath. You lose the air inside of you. And I felt like I was dying. I was like, my last moment on earth was flying through the air, sledding down this hill, and now I'm about to be with Jesus, right? Because I just felt I couldn't breathe. I couldn't catch my breath, and I wasn't sure if I broke a rib, or it turns out the only thing that was ruined long term was my reputation amongst all my friends, because I went from oohs and ahs as I was flying through the air to a bunch of laughing and giggling at me as I spent the rest of the day there laying on my back trying to recover, right? How many of you have ever experienced that kind of punch in the gut feeling physically, where you lose your breath and it's just like you fall, or maybe you're a gangster and you're in some kind of fight or something and you got punched in the gut, and you lose that feeling of just being punched in the gut, and you can't do anything to get your air back, and it's terrible, right? Well, we're kind of in the middle of this series called God with Us, and we're talking about how do we encounter God and his presence in different seasons of our lives. Our theme for the series, and maybe probably should be for our lives, is this idea found in the Christmas story in Matthew. If you're taking notes or following along in the YouVersion app, or you can follow on the screen. It's this idea that is talked about when talking about Jesus, and it says, "Look, the virgin will conceive a child, she will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means what? God with us. Right, last week we looked at this idea of how do we experience God in the valley. All right, we enjoy him on the mountaintops when things are going great. We're grateful. God is awesome. He's amazing. So glad that we follow him. We love those times on the mountaintops. But we get to know him in the valley when we're going through hard times, and we press into him. So this week we're going to take another look at another metaphor that we often see described by the writers of the Bible, and it's this idea of a wilderness. All right, wilderness is different from the valley in that it tends to feel like it's a little bit more extreme, kind of like that punch in the gut, feeling like you just don't know if you're going to be able to breathe again. It could probably feel like it lasts a little bit longer in life, like it's been this ongoing season that just won't end. Maybe for us in Syracuse, it's a little bit more relatable if we think about it more as being winter, right? Not a desert land. We get maybe 1 or 2 days of that throughout the summer, but winter, right, that just seems to last for 9 months out of the year and just won't go away. The sun will come out, right? You start opening the pool, and then the next day it snows. It's just always lingering here in Syracuse. That is our desert land, right? It's just not a season that somehow just always stays around. C.S. Lewis uses this phrase when he describes Narnia in the Chronicles of Narnia. He says it's always, always winter, but never Christmas. Right? This idea of Aslan not being there and under the oppression of the White Witch, and almost like it could be in parentheses, Syracuse. Always, always winter, but never ever Christmas. Right? You might say it's kind of this indefinite feeling of having the air knocked out of you, being punched in the gut and wondering, man, when's it going to end? If it's going to end, when is it going to be over? And when we describe it as a season, it's so much more than just something physical a lot of times, right? And it may be the result of something physical, some kind of injury or long-term rehabilitation you're a part of. But it can also be a very emotional feeling that you feel inside. I remember a couple months ago, before we decided we were going to move, it was the summer, and Olaf is the dog that we have. It's a little Pomsky. He's part Pomeranian, part Husky. So he's like this little baby husky that never gets bigger than like a little baby. Unfortunately, I feel like that's his brain too. It never really gets bigger past puppy mode because he's always just doing puppyish things. But anyways, over the summer, he has this kind of fenced-in yard that he can just roam around and do whatever he wants in. And whenever a dog tends to walk by, he gets all like he's the biggest dog there is in Syracuse, right? All rough and tough on this side of the fence. Well, it just happened that one of our neighborhood kids that tends to, tease Olaf from the other side of the fence and kind of give him reason to be angry at him, asked if he could come and pet Olaf, right? And I'm thinking the whole reason I got the dog was so that people could think he was cute and want to pet him. So I'm like, sure, come on in, right? So I bring him into the fenced-in area, and as we're about to pet Olaf, one of the neighborhood dogs come walking by, and Olaf starts to get all crazy, and it's almost like in slow motion as the young boy goes to start to pet him, he bites him in the hand, right? I mean, it's the kind of thing you hear on the news where they then, the city comes and they take the dog, and the, police officers come and they take you away for not restraining your dog. And it broke skin on his hand, and all I can think about, man, we're going to lose everything in our lives now because we're going to be sued, and, the kid's hand's probably going to fall off now as a result of this, and there goes all my future ministry and plans here in Syracuse. I'm going to have to change my identity. But it literally gave me, nothing physically happened to me, but it gave me that feeling in my gut, like, man, my kid's future is over now because I'm not going to be able to provide for them because I'm going to be working, paying for this kid's, lifestyles of the rich and famous world for him. And it just lingered because you never know if this is the day that it happens. The lawyers come. This is the day I get a phone call. Every time it rings and I don't recognize the number, is it going to be some kind of, yes, this is the attorney so-and-so, and we're coming for you. Right? It was just this ongoing, and never knew what was going to happen. I had this feeling in my gut like I couldn't breathe sometimes because of what it could do to our family. When's it going to be over? Maybe today here you're a husband and a wife and you've been trying to conceive and it's just something that's been going on for years and you've never been able to do it. Or maybe you're a student here this morning and you're encountering some kind of bullying at school where kids are making fun of you or calling you names and you're no reason why you don't deserve it. When's it going to end? How long is this going to happen for? And it could be that you're, single and alone and then you don't want to be, but you're always kind of getting caught up with people in your past relationships and back and forth, and you're trying to move forward, but you're always kind of being pulled back, and it gets frustrating and more frustrating every time, and just, when's it going to end? How long is it going to be like this? So when we look at different people's lives who kind of walk through seasons of this in the Bible, what we see is they often follow mountaintop experiences. They go through these experiences, they're just over the top amazing, and then they find themselves in these desert-like experiences. You think about Jesus, right? Jesus, as he began his ministry, he goes to be baptized by John the Baptist, and as it happens, it's literally like this awesome show, spectacular. The skies open up, and it says the Spirit of God descended like a dove on him, and this booming voice comes out of nowhere. This is my son, right? Speaking such identity into Jesus and to all those who are there. This is my son, and who I'm well pleased. And if that doesn't just make you feel on top of the world, I don't know what would. But then the next verse says the Spirit drove him into the wilderness. And for the next 40 days, Jesus would spend some of probably second to the Passion Week, the most agonizing days of his life here on earth, going through different things and needs, being tempted. Different mountaintop experiences. Or you think about Mary, right? Mary has this awesome, you're going to give birth to the Son of God, and it's going to be this amazing thing that your son is going to do in the world. And then she goes into the season of being isolated from her family, traveling on a donkey, living in the desert, traveling to a place where she'd give birth in a stable, having to flee into Egypt, the season of carrying the Savior of the world and having to be in the witness protection program. Maybe you thought things were going great in a friendship or a relationship, and the next thing that you know is they're calling it quits. And you don't know why, you don't know what happened, but it just leaves you with that gasping for air feeling in your spirit. You're in the desert. You are so close to getting out from under the financial debt in your life, but then the car breaks down and the bills start adding up again, and you're back to using your credit cards, and now you're left just feeling desperate in the wilderness. So if there's one thing that you get out of today that I pray goes beyond just hearing it and getting into your mind, as it takes a hold of you deep in your spirit, it's this idea this morning: that your deepest need becomes a gift when it drives you to depend upon God. Your deepest need becomes a gift when it drives you to depend on God. You see, we're going to kind of camp out looking at the life of a man of God who walked through this desert type of experience in his life. Elijah was a prophet who just simply means he spoke to the people what God wanted to say, and he lived during a time when the powers that be, the king and the queen and the government who were supposed to represent God on earth, did the very exact opposite. They were evil. And Elijah had these different awesome mountaintop experiences. If you're familiar with the Mount Carmel story, Elijah's on Mount Carmel and he calls out all the false prophets, and he has the two different altars. They make their altar, he makes his altar, and he mocks them and says, call down fire, and where's your God? Maybe he's out going to the bathroom, maybe he's taking a nap. And then he prepares his altar and he digs a trench around it, and in the middle of this famine, he has this precious water poured on it 3 times, and he prays, and fire from God just comes down and consumes everything, right? Like, that's a mountaintop experience. You're kind of a big deal when you're able to be calling fire down from heaven, right? Try doing that at your next camp out event, okay, and see people start looking at you a little differently, right? But a little context for our story: Ahab is the king, and the Bible describes him as a very evil king. But he had an even more evil wife named Jezebel. You may have heard that name before. because she's known for being evil. And when she heard what Elijah did up on Mount Carmel and what happened after God showed up in fire and he killed all of the false prophets, she started to kind of show who really wore the pants in the family. And she kind of issued this, we'll call it a hit for Elijah's life, and says, if you're not dead within the next 24 hours, so help me, it's about to get real. She puts this bounty on Elijah's life. And Ahab is right, he's been after him for years and years, and Elijah kind of brushes it off. But as soon as the woman gets involved, Elijah gets scared, right? And look at what happened. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life when he heard this. All right, when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. Now, just a quick note here, when you think about the distance from where he was to Beersheba, this is not just a simple little jog, all right? This is probably a distance of about 100 miles. And Elijah's probably a little up there in his years in his life, and we see here Elijah was kind of like the original Forrest Gump, right? Run, Forrest, run. Like Elijah is just running, and he just ran, and he finds himself 100 miles away in Beersheba in Judah. And while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. This was the guy who just the night before was calling down fire from heaven and making s'mores, around with his friends. And now he's alone, scared, depressed at what's going on. And he prays a prayer that probably not too far from some of the same things we've said in life at some point. He prays this prayer. He says, I've had enough. Lord, he said, take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. You've just thrown in the towel, just given up, and I can't take any more of this. Or maybe it was some different point in your life, or maybe it's at a point in your life now that you're going through something. If you raise kids, then you've probably said this multiple times. I give up, right? If you work someplace and you don't feel fulfilled in the work that you're doing, you've probably said, man, I just don't know how much longer I can take this. My wife, she works so hard at making sure we all get a good family meal together whenever we can, and we're all there. And she'll just be working intently in the kitchen, cooking, and you can see the joy in her face and her little kind of bopping as she's cooking, because she loves that experience. But then she gives the food to everybody, and it's like crickets. Nobody wants to eat it. And she's always so sad. She's like, nobody likes my food. And it's true, right? She works so hard, but then she just gives up, and she always says, I'm never doing it again. But somehow she finds the will to try it again and something else. But you can almost see just the desperation in her face as the kids are all like looking at it, shaking their heads no, like they're not going near it. And I kind of get everyone's food put into my plate, and I wait till she's not looking, and I put it in the trash can, right? And I'm saying, I think Mama Skinner made us something the other day we can warm up in the oven. We'll find deep down in there, right? But it's that same, I give up. And this is what happens to Elijah. I've had enough, Lord. I take my life. It'd be better if I just wasn't even here. The guy who not only saw, but led one of the most amazing demonstrations of the power of God in the Bible, finds himself depressed and alone and ready just to give up. A little bit more backstory here on Elijah. At the beginning of his story, he's kind of staring down evil in the land, and he tells Ahab and prophesies. He says, here's the deal. As long as there's evil in the land, there's not going to be any rain until I say so. Because of the result of your wickedness and what you've allowed to happen, this is the foreseeable future. There's going to be pain and suffering and drought. And so there's this drought that comes over the land, and the king doesn't really like Elijah. As a result of this, it kind of puts, a bad taste in his mouth. So he sends all of his forces on this mission to get Elijah, this troubler of Israel. He goes kind of underground, so he's not able to be found for the next 3 years. Elijah's kind of living underground. And God does some really miraculous things in his life to help him. He sends food to him through ravens. They bring him different pieces of meat, and God gives him his own little brook of water that he's able to drink from in the midst of this drought. God uses Elijah to raise a dead young boy back to life. Right? He does all these amazing things. He has the showdown on Mount Carmel with the false prophets, and he calls down fire from heaven. And then afterwards, he asks God to make it rain. Okay, it's time to make it rain. And kind of in the distance, he sees this cloud that's kind of the size of a hand, and he starts to tell everybody, all right, you better get prepared because it's about to get wet around here in a big way. And he asks God to make it rain, and it does. And here's a guy who's walked on the mountaintop and experienced God like few people can say they have. But all of a sudden, one woman makes a threat on his life, and he is on the run. Right? Some of you can probably relate. I'm doing the best that I can, but the best just doesn't seem to be good enough. I'm just tired. I'm worn out, frustrated. I can think about even in our own current living situation, it's kind of like, the best of times and the worst of times. We're really excited about this opportunity to move and be closer here in Eastwood. And things have just recently in the last week or two progressed as we've gotten an offer on our house, and it just passed the home inspection. And, things are starting to feel like, man, I can taste it. But for the last month, it's been like a desert of nobody really coming to and being interested in our house. I don't know if you've ever been in a place where you've had a wife and 4 little girls under the age of 7, but I happen to find myself at that point in life right now. And I'm living in a house that's not my own house. So whenever I come home from work, normally I could be in my own house and I can walk around in shorts or, just be free to be, comfortable with my own family. But I'm living in a house that's not my own. So I can't do a lot of the things that I would normally do before. So I'm kind of always on edge and never really fully just able to rest and relax, it feels like. And then knowing that whenever this finishes, when the house finally sells, it's still going to be another 2 to 3 month project for the new house to get renovated. Like in the back of my mind, I literally feel like this is never going to end and I'm going to go crazy because I just don't have a space to be able to chillax, or I don't have my own bed or my own pillows or my own walk-in shower that I built or had someone else build. I couldn't build it for the life of me, but my beautiful walk-in shower, right? When is this? It just is a very weird time in my life to feel this long period of frustration and what's going on. And what I'm noticing about myself during this time is that I've probably had a little misdiagnosis going on in my life, right? It's not so much that I'm tired, right? Because if it were just that I was tired, then I'd be able to take a nap or sleep more, and it would solve my problem. But I've tried that many times. I've tried. I need to go take a nap, right? Or I need to sleep in. But it's not so much that I'm in need of more physical rest, but it's that I'm finding that I am in need of more spiritual replenishment in my life. And maybe, right, you could be like me and you're not just physically tired, but there's some spiritually depleted lives represented here this morning. And in that place where you're just kind of exasperated, what we need is an encounter with the very real presence of God. Not more naps, not being able to sleep in longer, but what you need is some spiritual replenishment in your life. It's kind of this intimate moment where you experience the grace and the mercy of God and the forgiveness and the purpose of God for your life. Maybe physical rest would do you some good. There's nothing wrong with a good power nap, right? But even more than just physical rest, what we need is spiritual replenishment in our lives. David describes it this way in Psalms, right? He says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside still waters. But then what does he say? He says, He, the Lord restores my soul. Right? It's not, he gives me a nap or lets me sleep in. David recognizes there's this internal rest, this internal connection with God that has got to be there if he's going to find his soul feeling restored. And he doesn't just stop lying down. He recognizes that he needs God to do something deep inside of him that he can't do on his own. Not just a physical tired, but a spiritual depleted life. So what does God do in Elijah's life, right? I tell you what he doesn't do. He doesn't give Elijah some sermon with 3 points to iron out, right, how you need to change, Elijah. He doesn't text him a list of verses that says, Elijah, if you just memorize these verses, it's going to turn everything around for you. What he does is he tells him this. He says, all at once an angel touched him and said this. He says, get up and eat. Can anybody here get on board with that, right? Get up and eat. I was finishing this up last night, right? And as I'm working on it, I read that and I was like, I'm going to do that. So I got up and I went to the kitchen and I finished off my wife's cheesecake that we got the couple nights before, right? And I'm like, sometimes, guys, the most spiritual thing that you can do is to just rest in the presence of God and eat some cheesecake, right? Get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread, right? Some nice gluten-free bread that was baked over hot coals and a jar of nice purified water. He ate and drank, and then he laid down again and got some rest, right? But then the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by the food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Right? Sometimes I don't get it the first time, or even the second time, or even subsequent times after that. Right? Sometimes it takes a few times to kind of knock me back into my senses. But the presence of God, as we see here in Elijah's life, is that it pursues you. Even though Elijah didn't get it the first time and he just kind of went back to bed, he pursues, and the angel of the Lord came back and woke him up. And for some of you today, you may feel like you're right back where you were last week. You came up and you got prayed over, or you felt the Spirit stirring in your heart last Sunday, and then Monday came along and you can't even remember what happened on Sunday. But the Lord came back again. He pursues us. Even as we fall away or fall back asleep, he pursues us. And he will pursue you as long as your heart is open. And then there he went into a cave and went back to bed and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Right? Why are you running? I say to my girls all the time, right? What do you think you're doing? You know better than this, right? And they kind of look at me with that guilty, they just got busted look in their face. My girls have access to me whenever they want it. And all I got to have to do is look at me and kind of bat their eyes, and I fall over and will give them anything that they want. But they're choosing to kind of go their own way and do their own thing. And it's, what are you doing? Don't you know what you have access to? What are you doing? As hard as it may be for you to believe this about my girls, because they're such angels, all right? Sometimes they whine, right? Chazere kind of gets this the biggest frown I've ever seen on any human being before, where she can make her, literally the ends of her mouth go like below her chin. I don't know how she does it with this pout face. And you kind of have that whiny voice, right? And maybe you've gotten a whiny voice with God sometimes, and so does Elijah. He starts to whine. He says, I've been very zealous for the Lord, God. The Israelites have rejected your covenant and torn down your altars and put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. Woe is me. God, I've been working so hard for you. I've sacrificed so much. He's in the spiritual wilderness, and he's hurting. His need is so great that he can't even see past it. Just present what's in front of him. But God, by his very nature, meets Elijah right there in his greatest moment of need. And you know, how easy would it be to kind of blow him out of the water in this moment of vulnerability, right? Suck it up, man, get up. Get back in the game. After all that you've been through and all that I've done through you, you think you'd have this down now. But instead, God brings healing in the middle of Elijah's hurt. More than anything, I pray that's what captures you deep in your soul here today, is that your deepest need can become a gift when it drives you to depend on God. And God comes to him again and again and meets him in his need. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountaintop in the presence of the Lord. For the Lord is about to pass by. You're about to meet and experience the presence of God, Elijah, in a way that I kind of have to hold back, because if I give you the full thing, you would die. But more than most, you're going to experience the presence of God here, right? And then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. It goes on, and after the wind, there was this earthquake. The ground is trembling. Well, this has got to be God then. It's so big and powerful and boisterous. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. This is how God, you responded before by fire from heaven consumed. This has got to be you, but the Lord was not in the fire. Right? Surely this must be God if I just do better going to church, or if I just give more money in the box, or if I just play enough Hillsong music on my iPod. But God's like, yeah, those things are cool, but no, it's not in the earthquake, right? Not in the winds, not in the fire. Earth, wind, fire. God did all that for you guys born in the 70s. That was a little bonus for you, a little earth, wind, and fire there, right? But God starts to turn things upside down for Elijah, and he says, and after the fire came a gentle whisper. A gentle whisper. He wasn't in the show of the earthquake and the strong wind and the fire. He was just in the ordinary whisper. And I wonder, why is that, right? When life is so difficult and God's voice seems so quiet, why is it so gentle? Why is it still and small, right? If God wants us to hear him, then why does he just settle for whispering? Why doesn't he shout? Why not loud and dramatic for all to hear and everyone around can know, oh my goodness, I believe now, because God rumbling like a mighty earthquake. God whispers, and you got to get this. God whispers because he is close. Because he's right there with you. He whispers because he's near to you. You see, the devil is going to shout all sorts of lies to you that try to drown out the still small voice as God is whispering his truth to you. Right? God doesn't shout to get your attention, but he whispers to draw you close to him. And what does he say to you? He says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I've been with you every single step of the way. I love you more than you could possibly imagine. When you hurt, I hurt with you. I'm with you in the valley, and I'm with you in the wilderness. And the truth is, where else do you want to be when you're afraid? Right? Think about when you were a kid in the middle of a storm, right? Where did you want to be? In your parents' bed, right? Anytime there's a big storm, my girls come running in straight for mom and dad's bed. And as a general rule, they're not allowed to sleep with us, right? They have their bed, we have ours. It's as simple as that. But after some kind of storm, I wake up and there's usually a foot in my face and somebody's elbow in my thigh and 8 different body parts that have somehow managed to take up my side of the bed. But they want to be close to the ones who make them feel safe. In the middle of the storm, you don't have to run into God's bed because he's already there with you. He's close. If you're hurting and broken, he's hurting and broken. Look at where he is. He says in Psalms, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. All right, why does he whisper? Because he's close. He's near. And remember what David said, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me by still waters. He restores my soul. And even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because he is with me. Emmanuel, God with us. He knows his sheep by name, and his sheep know his still small voice. David described God's presence this way. He says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, then you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. How close is the presence of God where he can just reach out and just hold your hand? Why does God whisper? Because he's close. And one day you will discover that your deepest need becomes a gift when it drives you to depend on God. We enjoy God on the mountaintops, but we get to know him intimately in the valleys. When we are wandering in the desert and we feel like, man, no one understands and he doesn't understand, and the truth is he cares. And he is always good. He wasn't in the booming earthquake. He wasn't in the raging fire or the rushing winds. But where was he? He was in the whisper. And the virgin will give birth to a child, and he'll be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. Why does he whisper? He whispers because he's close. Will you bow your heads with me this morning? This morning, God is wanting to flip some things upside down. It's not about the show. It's not about the earthquake and the fire and the big dramatic, but it's about the still small voice and the whisper. And about being so close to God that we can hear the whisper and we can allow the hardest times in our lives to be a blessing as we're just pressed farther into the bosom of a God who loves us. And in that spot, we can hear the heartbeat of a Father whose love is intent for us. And our heart starts to respond in rhythm as we hear his heartbeat for the world, and we can't help but go into the world and be his beating heart. So there's no doubt in a group of people, from 1 to 1,000, we're going to have people who find themselves in the desert. So if you're here this morning, no one's looking around, everyone's eyes are closed, their head just bowed, and just between you and God is kind of a declaration this morning to say, I find myself in that spot, but I want to press in to know God and find myself diving into his presence, to experience that gift as I depend upon God. No one's looking around, but if that's you this morning, I want to say a special prayer for you. If you just raise your hand and say, I'm in that spot, in that desert. I know exactly what you're talking about. God, you see every single person just confessing before you the reality of their life, feeling lost in this desert wilderness or this winter tundra. Can't making heads or tails out of anything, and your desire is to draw close to them and to pursue them over and over again in a way where they're so close they hear your heartbeat for them, and they can hear them whisper, I love you. I have a plan and a purpose for you. I know there's all sorts of lies that the enemy's trying to distract you with, but I have something better for you. I will never leave you or forsake you. God, I just pray that reality would become so foundational in every single heart this morning. Everyone that's crying out saying, God, I'm in this wilderness and I need you. That there would just be a special outpouring of your presence where they would feel you here this morning in an intimate way, that the spiritual depletion and exhaustion that we may be suffering from this morning, we would begin to be finding our souls refreshed in you. As we turn and our deepest needs become a gift as we're driven into your arms. God, continue your work in these hands that are raised. Maybe you're here this morning and you say, man, I don't know what it's like to have this kind of relationship with Jesus. I've been all about, I go to church because that's what you're supposed to do, or I put money in because that's what they tell me, to get my card stamped so I can show it at the pearly gates and they'll let me through. But this idea of this relationship that God wants to have with you, where it's so intimate and close that you can hear his whispering louder than you can hear the shouts from the world. This morning, God wants to begin a new relationship with you. And if that's you here this morning and it's just simple in your heart to say, God, I'm sorry for the things that I've allowed to distract me from being in this intimate relationship with you. I want to turn from those things and I want to pursue your still small voice in my life and the plans and the purposes that you have for me in my life. God, I pray for all of us as Forward Point that we would become a family of people so united in hearing your heartbeat that we can't help but just be your heartbeat for Eastwood and for East Syracuse and for Syracuse and for Central New York, that we could be your heartbeat here, that you would work and move through us, bring us into divine relationships with people, that we can begin to pull people off the street like we do and pull people from our workplaces, from our neighborhoods, who find themselves in their own valley or wilderness. That you would even use the remaining weeks of this series as we learn what it means that you're Emmanuel, God with us. That you would use our Christmas Eve gathering as a time to just turn hearts back towards you. We don't want to build a kingdom here at the Palace or for Forward Point, but we want to build your kingdom in heaven. So have your way in us this morning.